I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
Welcome, everybody. Hello. Good afternoon to our distinguished guests, His Excellency the Ambassador for South Africa, and our undistinguished guests, the rest of you. Sorry. My name is Ikenna Azuike, and it is my pleasure to give you a very warm welcome to the 5th ZAM Magazine Nelson Mandela Lecture Series. Okay, I see. You're going to give me the Dutch kringverjaardag round of applause, are you? Listen, it's just enough clapping to acknowledge effort, but not enough to show real enthusiasm. You know, that's what I'm sensing. Folks, come on. I said this is the 5th edition, right? No. Now you wait for the cue, all right? Now you wait for the cue. This is the 5th edition of this. Most Netflix, even the successful ones, most Netflix series only get like 3 seasons. All right, so this is basically the Jackson 5 of thought-provoking lecture series, okay? So I want another round of applause that is 5-year anniversary worthy. I demand it. The ancestors demand it. Anyone here with African parents? You know that as soon as we start enunciating our words, we mean business, okay? So I'm going to give you a cue, and then I want you to take the roof off this building. All right, ready? Hello, everyone. My name is Ikenna Azuike. It's my pleasure to give you a very warm welcome to this 5th edition of the Nelson Mandela Lecture, a series! Woohoo! Very good. Oh. Okay. All right. Now you're just showing off. I like that. Second wave of applause. Lovely. Okay, for those of you who don't already know, ZAM Magazine's Nelson Mandela Lecture is building on the solidarity for movements like those of against movements like apartheid and colonialism. Today is really an opportunity to reflect and celebrate the values that Nelson Mandela stood for and have a think about what they really mean now, personally, to all of us, to all of you, especially in these kind of populist-driven, polarized times that we live in. How relevant are they still for you? More broadly, ZAM Magazine is a home, a platform to African changemakers in the fields of investigative journalism, pop culture, dance, photography, some of which we're going to translate this evening, and you'll see on this stage. This is Need for Nix here, this setup. So we've got some fantastic words that will be spoken and performances that you will be able to enjoy. A couple of practical things before we move on. The material that you see here, all the content rather, everything that's said and spoken will be available on the ZAM website shortly after today. And there will also be, there are some QR codes, I believe, maybe shortly on the screen behind me, or at least in and around the foyer where you can download the summary, also available in English, of the laureate John-Allan Namu's reading. So be sure to check that out as well. And the last practical thing is your mobile phones. If you haven't already done so, please put your mobile phones at least on silent or turn them off. We don't want to hear your Beyonce ringtones and all of that, okay? Right. I am just the amuse when it comes to openings. I'm now going to introduce a very special guest who is going to give us an official opening to this ZAM Magazine Nelson Mandela Lecture Series. Please give her a massive round of applause. The Mayor of Amsterdam, no less, Femke Halsema.
Well, I can see that you have practiced. Ambassador Mandela, dear Mr. Namu, and very, very distinguished guests. We are human only through the humanity of others. These words by Nelson Mandela can be found on a memorial to him that was erected in the city district of Amsterdam Southeast in 2021. The memorial is a work by the South African artist Moha Modi-Sakeng. The words are engraved on a plinth, on top of which are 7 bronze sculptures. These depict not Mandela himself, but show the faces of others, based on sketches the artist made of residents of the neighborhood. Mandela's quote emphasizes the fact that people are more than just individuals. We are part of a community that shapes us and from which we can learn. His words encompass a plea to us, to all of us Amsterdammers. In a city that is home to so many nationalities and cultures, we must always remember our shared humanity, regardless of our many, many differences. Nelson Mandela was not a stranger to Amsterdam. He traveled here in 1990, around 4 months after his release from prison. And he was greeted, as probably the older people remember, as do I, by enthusiastic applause and cheers as he stood on the balcony of this very building, the balcony you just passed under when you were walking in. The square, Leidseplein, was full of people. And my predecessor said, and hier is hij nu. This is him. Amsterdammers had deeply sympathized with Mandela's imprisonment in a South Africa that was being torn up by apartheid. 9 years later, he would receive the city's gold medal, the highest civic honor awarded by Amsterdam. But as much as Mandela's ideas were and are being celebrated here, we, the Dutch, we Amsterdammers, are guilty of racism too. After the abolishment of slavery and the end of colonialism, the inhumanity of this history has continued to plague our country. Not long ago, just 2.5 years, the Dutch cabinet recognized that part of the tax office was guilty of institutional racism. And colleagues of mine here at the municipality are also, and sometimes daily, affected by racism in their working environments. 35 years after Mandela's release from prison, we must continue to honor his words here, in our country and our city. We need to ask ourselves every day how we can retain our human values in businesses, schools, and on the streets. Fortunately, there are Amsterdammers that can inspire us in this, and I think we need them, especially in these times. People who can show us how we can be a city where everybody has equal opportunities. Take Edson Sabayo and G. Smith, founders of the internationally renowned fashion brand Pata. They had goals that went beyond commercial and creative success. Their Pata Academy supports young people who have demonstrated entrepreneurial spirit by connecting them with the Pata network, which includes financial and legal experts and marketing specialists. By doing this, Pata's founders follow their credo of each one, teach one. That credo is also behind the foundation of Kwame Akyapontra, better known as Meester Kwame. Meester being the Dutch form to address teachers. Kwame helps children with their schoolwork. Parents can also count on him if they have difficulty, for example, with debt collectors. As a former law student, Kwame can help them with correspondence and other matters. Another example are Amsterdam's buurtouders, neighborhood parents, who take to the streets when young people are causing trouble. 2 weeks ago, I spoke to a group of these men and women. They are Amsterdammers who feel responsible for their neighborhoods and who spread their human values to help their community. They are indispensable. All these Amsterdammers and many more are a remedy for cynicism, because it is possible in a city in which we look out for each other, where we live in harmony with each other, just like the Mandela Memorial instructs us to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, the investigative journalism of Africa Uncensored, where Mr. Namu is editor-in-chief, plays an important role in exposing human rights violations, corruption, and social injustice. These examples I just gave show how important it is that we all operate according to our human values. I hope that the lecture will encourage everyone to take a moment to think about the meaning that Mandela's ideas have in our society today, because it is crucial, because we need them. I wish everyone an inspiring afternoon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for those words.
You're welcome.
Ms. Halsema. You got a very warm welcome there. I think
Yes, and so spontaneous. I was really moved by it.
Yeah, but listen, we talked briefly backstage about what are the things that give you, I don't know, courage, because you are on the political front lines.
Yes.
And I mentioned earlier, we live in what feel to us, at any rate, I think, as unprecedented, polarized and populist-led times.
Yes.
What gives you the courage to go on, the optimism?
Well, I think the people I just mentioned, I think this city, well, I have to say that, of course, but I really mean it also. I think also if you look at the history of this city and you see its resilience and you see the way people survive on and on again, and the way this city forms itself and is a democratic order of itself, well, I think that gives courage for the future.
Yeah, but I mean, in those, it feels like a politician's answer.
All right, thank you.
I mean.
Well, we practiced it behind, and then you said, well, he said, that's
Don't
a good
encourage
answer.
her. Don't encourage her. None of that, please. None of that.
Yeah, he asked me to say this.
I mean, on those moments, you've had an awful day. You've had a terrible conversation with someone, and the world continues to burn as much as it does. You're bloody, I don't know, everything's going wrong, and then you get into bed at night and you're thinking, geez, do you ever have those low moments and you think, maybe I should just, I don't know, stop or...
Well, this is going to be a quite different conversation than I imagined it would be. Well, of course.
In those
And
moments, what gets you out of that hole?
I think many people are anxious at the moment because these are very difficult times, I think, we live in. And I think you see so many geopolitical shifts. Europe is changing, the United States are changing, Russia is changing, our relationships with them are changing. So at night when I can't sleep, I watch The Sopranos. What else is there to do?
Okay. Head to Netflix, everyone. Thank you very much. Super. Okay. Alrighty. Oh, that's going to roll off, isn't it? Thanks. Great. Okay, listen, in 2022, for those of you who were here, we welcomed choreographer and dancer Gregory Makoma onto the stage. And since that point, ZAM was in touch with one of his colleagues, a dancer and choreographer, Dada Masilo, who's born in Soweto in South Africa. And she had a dream from a very young age that she wanted to be a dancer, which is something her parents absolutely supported. Just kidding, of course they didn't. They're South African parents, they're African parents. They were very skeptical, but she had a dream and she kept on going and she exceeded everyone's expectations. She was fantastic. She transformed classical and Western productions which are household names for many of us, like Hamlet, Giselle, Carmen, and Swan Lake, into hugely innovative pieces. She's a funny lady. She was an activist. She used her art to create awareness about often taboo subjects like HIV and AIDS, repression against women, violence against women, and homophobia, often using humor in her work, and often turning around and challenging traditional gender roles, for instance, putting men in tutus. Tragically, she passed away very recently, just last December, at the age of 39. 39. So it's an immense loss to the South African community and, to be honest, the world cultural community, because she made a difference with her work. What we're about to show now is a short compilation of one of her last ballets, rather, The Sacrifice. If you don't already know her work, please see that video as a kind of invitation to find out more about Dada Masilo and watch more of her performances online. Okay, in the same vein, in terms of creating impact with your work and creating beautiful art, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce two superbly talented young women as our next performers on stage. The pianist, Djuwa Mroivili, and opera singer, Ashley Stapelfeldt, who will be performing Malaika, or which translates as My Angel. Please give them a rapturous round of applause. There.
Malaika, nakupenda malaika. Malaika, nakupenda malaika. Ningekuoa maliwe, ningekuoa dada. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Pesa zasumbua roho yangu, pesa zasumbua roho yangu, nami nifanyeje kijana mwenzio? Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Kideke hukuwaza kideke, kideke hukuwaza kideke, nami nifanyeje kijana mwenzio? Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ningekuoa malaika. Malaika, nakupenda. Malaika, kuchoni langa zakubuyinkomo ndakucinga ngawe la kuchoni langa yakuveli yanga peshwe okolwangle ndakucinga ngawe la kuchoni langa ndohamba ndikufuna ezindlini nasesestratweni espetlelo etrongweni ndindendi kufumane la kuchoni langa zakubuyinkomo ndakucinga ngawe la kuchoni langa
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, goosebumps, right? Anyone else? Oh, amazing, love it. Thank you very much. And for those of you who want to know or who are interested, Malaika is actually a song which was first written in Swahili by a Kenyan artist, and it's a Tanzanian love song. So maybe he was Tanzanian. But it was then made internationally famous by a name we probably all remember, recognize, Miriam Makeba. So fantastic, that rendition there from two super talents. Right, time to get back to the program. And the next thing you're going to watch is something from a stalwart of the ZAM magazine Nelson Mandela Lecture series. He is someone who's usually always physically present here in the room to share his reflections. Right now, unfortunately, he's going to just do that via video, but he's still worth a massive round of applause because I think he's a national treasure, someone who inspires me. Give him a round of applause, Adriaan van Dis.
Goedemiddag, geachte aanwezigen. Sta mij toe een gedicht voor te lezen en een dichter aan u voor te stellen. Ondanks het feit dat ik schor ben, want heel Holland hoest. Ik had het graag trouwens hier op het toneel gedaan, maar ik was zo dom een dubbele afspraak te maken. En daarom lees ik het op film voor. Ode aan het verdriet van Ghayath Almadhoun. Deze in Syrië geboren Palestijn met een Zweeds paspoort schrijft beklemmende proza-gedichten. Bij voorkeur hardop te lezen. In een interview met Alex Burghorn zei hij: ik heb het geluk dat er 500 miljoen mensen Arabisch spreken. Mensen kunnen mij van een dorp in Libië tot in de bergen van Jemen lezen. Daar downloaden ze mijn bundels, illegaal, of sturen ze rond als pdf-bestanden. Ik verdien er geen geld mee. Maar ik heb wel miljoenen lezers, zonder overdrijven. Het voelt alsof ik een leger aan lezers heb. Toch heb ik met Nederland een bijzondere band. Lezers begrijpen me hier, beter dan bijvoorbeeld in Zweden. Zelfs mijn kritische gedichten over Europa kunnen jullie aan. Ode aan het verdriet komt uit zijn bundel Ik heb een afgehakte hand voor je meegenomen. En het idee is ontstaan na een opdracht van het Haagse literaire festival Writers Unlimited. Herschrijf het Europese volkslied Ode aan die Freude. U weet wel, die tekst van Friedrich Schiller uit 1785, getoonzet door Ludwig van Beethoven, die het als koorzang gebruikte in zijn 9e symfonie. Ik koos dit gedicht ook omdat actuele voorstellen om van Gaza een vakantiebestemming te maken herinneren aan de miljoenendeportatie onder apartheid. Ode aan het verdriet is klankvol vertaald door Tjoeke Poppinga. We houden van je, Europa, o oud continent. Ik weet niet waarom ze je oud noemen. Want je bent jong vergeleken met Egypte en het land van Uifraat en Tigris. We houden van je, Europa. We betalen je belastingen, net als de witte mannen. En we verdragen je wisselvallige humeur. Dat lijkt op je klimaat en het ernstig gebrek aan vitamine D als gevolg van je donkere winters. We houden van je. Hoewel we tot ons verdriet nooit aan de diepe duisternis van je lange winters zullen wennen. Kijk, daar zijn onze vrienden, de Europeanen. Ik bedoel jouw oorspronkelijke bewoners, geboren in je koude noorden, uit Arische voorouders die net als wij leden aan depressies en vitamine D tekort. Want volgens de evolutietheorie zijn zij ook homo sapiens uit Afrika. Maar je oorspronkelijke bewoners, daarmee bedoel ik de Neandertalers die zich in de ijstijd zo hebben ontwikkeld dat ze jouw kou konden weerstaan, zijn uitgestorven. We houden van je, Europa, en we ontkennen niet dat we naar je toe zijn gekomen vanuit de derde wereld, zoals jullie dat zeggen. Ik ben om precies te zijn gekomen vanuit Damascus en heb de vele clichés, stereotypen en vooroordelen van je schrijvers en dichters moeten slikken. Ik verveelde me, werd moe en walgde van de voortdurende oppervlakkige vragen over de positie van de vrouw in het Midden-Oosten, terwijl ik feminist ben. Kijk, ik ben bereid te erkennen en bekennen dat de vrouw in Syrië pas in 1949 kiesrecht kreeg. In Zwitserland daarentegen, de hoofdstad van jouw geld en van het geld van onze dictators en hun geheime bankrekeningen, gebeurde dat pas in 1971. En niet in elk Zwitsers kanton. In het kanton Appenzell-Innerrhoden kreeg de vrouw pas in 1991 stemrecht. Mijn God, we houden van Europa. En we houden van de vrijheid die je ons hebt gebracht. Toen we als vluchtelingen naar je toe kwamen en het racisme negeerde dat jij onder het tapijt probeert te schuiven als je de woonkamer aanveegt. We houden van je, Europa, met je koloniale verleden. Jij, moordenaar van oorspronkelijke inwoners. Jij die het bloed hebt opgezogen van de volkeren van India tot Congo, van Brazilië tot Nieuw-Zeeland. Jij met je inquisities. Jij die vrouwen verbrandde omdat het heksen zouden zijn. Jij meester van de slavenhandel, die de zwarte naar de nieuwe wereld heeft gebracht. Jij die de apartheid in Zuid-Afrika hebt ingesteld. Jij die het fascisme en nazisme hebt gevestigd. Jij die de vernietiging van de Joden hebt bedacht. De Endleuzung die ertoe heeft geleid dat ik als vluchteling ben geboren in het Jarmouk-kamp voor Palestijnse vluchtelingen in Damascus, omdat je in al je schaamteloosheid met Palestina, mijn land, compensatie hebt betaald als de oplossing voor de Holocaust die jouw witte inwoners, die geloofden in het zuivere Arische ras, hebben uitgevoerd. We houden van je, Europa. En we dragen je paspoorten, die deuren voor ons openen. Met hetzelfde gemak waarmee jouw kogels het vlees hebben opengereten van 1 miljoen Algerijnen die wilden genieten van de vrijheid, gepredikt door jouw Franse revolutie. We houden van je, Europa. We houden van je kunst en we haten je koloniale geschiedenis. We houden van je theater en we haten je concentratiekampen. We houden van je muziek en we haten het geluid van je bommen. We houden van je filosofie en we haten Martin Heidegger. We houden van je literatuur en we haten het Orientalisme. We houden van je poëzie en we haten Ezra Pound. We houden van je vrijheid van meningsuiting en we haten je islamofobie. We houden van je culturele ontwikkeling, je secularisme, je rechtvaardige wetten en de mensenrechten op jouw grondgebied. We haten je racisme, je dubbele maatstaven, je superieure blik en je bloedige geschiedenis. Hou je nazisme bij je en geef ons Immanuel Kant. Hou je zwarthemden bij je en geef ons Italiaanse wijn. Hou je Algerijnse genocide bij je en geef ons Baudelaire. Hou Leopold II bij je en geef ons René Magritte. Hou Adolf Hitler bij je en geef ons Hannah Arendt. Hou Franco bij je en geef ons Cervantes. Hou je eigen dingen bij je en laat onze dingen aan ons.
Yes, Adriaan van Dis, another definitely one of those inspirational Amsterdammers that the mayor was talking about earlier on. Outspoken, just unstoppable, wonderful speaker. Okay, time now for another artistic performance here on stage. This one is going to be based on a song that was actually first recorded 50 years ago by South African musician Hugh Masekela. And Hugh Masekela was not just a musician, he was an activist as well. He fled South Africa not long after the Sharpeville massacre in 1960. He recorded this song, it's called Stimela, which translates as steam train, and it's written along the rhythm of a steam train. And the steam train is the one that carried thousands upon thousands of migrant workers to mines. They were underpaid, undernourished often, and we have some photos here. Well, that's Hugh Masekela himself, who performed here in Amsterdam in the 80s. And we also have some photos featuring the miners, and that shows the living conditions that they lived in. And these photos are from the book, Eli Weinberg's book, Images of a People. I believe you can get it in the Athenaeum bookstore here in the lobby outside. Right, please give a big round of applause to the group performing this song, Stimela, Fra Fra Sound, and their very, very special guest for this occasion only, an internationally acclaimed saxophonist. He is Mthunzi Mvubu. Round of applause, please.
Revolutionary greetings as we are gathered here in the name of a noble man, son of the soil, who was once labeled a terrorist, only to emerge as a global symbol for peace and reconciliation. We would like to dedicate this song for the people of South Africa, across the African continent and across the globe, who have been forcibly, brutally removed and displaced from their land, and their descendants still yet to see their ancestral land. We'd also like to dedicate this song to all the miners who are yet to enjoy the wealth they're digging. There's a train from Namibia and Malawi. There's a train from Zambia and Zimbabwe. There's a train from Angola and Mozambique, from Lesotho, from Botswana, from Swaziland, and all the hinterlands of Southern and Central Africa. This train carries young and old African men who are conscripted to come and work on contract in the gold and mineral mines of Johannesburg and its surrounding provinces and metropoli. 16 hours a day or more for almost no pay. Deep, deep, deep down in the belly of the earth, when they are digging and drilling for the shiny, mighty, evasive stone, or when they dish their mush food into their iron plates with their iron shovels, or when they sit in their stinky, filthy, funky, flea-ridden barracks and hostels, and they think about their loved ones they may never see again because they might have been already forcibly removed from where they last left them, or wantonly murdered in the dead of night by roving and marauding gangs of no particular origin. So we are told. They think about their land and their herds that were taken away from them with the gun and the cannon, with the Bible and the poison and the bomb. And when they hear that choo-choo train, smoking and grinding and pushing and climbing and totting and crying and moaning and ooh, they curse and they curse the coal train that brought them to Johannesburg. Stimela. Sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kubayi sangilahla kwakuqa wibale bathi sizomba malahle Stimela webabe sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kuba helele sangilahla kwakuqa webabe bathi sizomba malahle silingyule nkomponi helele mabe sihleli njengezinja iyelele mame ayemikotini mame sikhumbulisi hlobo zethu wololo sikhumbulisi ngane zethu wololo sikhumbula bo baby bethu mama ye sikhumbula bazali bethu angithi chele 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 Stimela sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kubayi Stimela sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kubayi sivele dala kubayi sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kubayi Stimela sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kubayi sivele dala kubayi Stimela sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala kubayi Ithi Stimela sihamba ngamalahle sivele dala
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I believe the kids today would describe that as sick. That was brilliant. That was very, very good. And you got the full Masekela past and present experience then, because the animation that you saw clips of was produced in collaboration with the Hugh Masekela Foundation right now. So that's good to know. It's lovely. Right, the moment. Oh, okay. Round of applause, please. One more for them. That's good. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, the moment is upon us for the 5th Nelson Mandela Lecture. And I would like you to give one more time a big round of applause for the person who's giving it. You all know his name by now, but he is the multi-award-winning editor-in-chief of investigative platform Africa Uncensored, based in Nairobi, John-Allan Namu.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon again to the Kenyans in the crowd. Habari zenu? Oh, well, I'm hearing a few Dutch people who are claiming Kenyan citizenship. So I'll say jambo tena, habari zenu. First of all, thank you very much for coming for this lecture and obviously the performances. And secondly, I've just been checking my watch for how hard my heart is beating right now, because it's the first time that I've done it. So as I'm giving my thanks, if things go badly, then you also know who to blame. It's ZAM, all right? So where to start? The title of my lecture is Souls on Fire, and hopefully at the end of it, you'll understand why. So let me start with the beginning. I was 7 when Nelson Mandela was released. I don't recall much else from that year except excitement, as if we all knew him personally. Our father, a former student activist, made sure that we all understood Mandela, not just through his lectures or news articles he made me read, but through music. His collection reflected who he was: a revolutionary turned family man. Punctuating every few records and tapes of Lionel Richie, Koffi Olomide, and Michael Jackson was something revolutionary. Bob Marley's greatest hits, Peter Tosh's Stepping Razor, and music from South Africa. Hugh Masekela's Bring Him Back Home told us about the love waiting for Mandela on the other side of apartheid's prison bars. I recall us trying to mimic the Xhosa clicks in the first verse of Miriam Makeba's Pata Pata. But my absolute favorite songs came from Paul Simon's Graceland. These songs, of course, bore a much larger significance than I could understand. But what they did was deify a man who the world had not seen for nearly 3 decades. But any music, when it's really good, speaks to someone's soul. When Lady Smith's Black Mambazo sang Homeless, even if I didn't understand a word, I felt the melancholy in the harmonies. As the music that preceded them had done, watching Winnie and Nelson Mandela walking hand in hand, as Masekela had just 4 years earlier prophesied, held that same power. The meaning transcended all planes of mortal understanding. Mandela was released at a pivotal time, not just for South Africa, but for Kenya as well. Kenya was on the cusp of a sea change in its politics that had been long in coming, one that my father would speak about in hushed tones, very hushed tones, at the urging of my mother. You see, Kenya was, after all, in the grips of a dictatorship that had sucked all the oxygen out of rooms where ideas of alternative leadership, or at the very least, a better way to live, were once spoken. As Mandela walked free in South Africa, carrying the promise of a new dawn, Kenya remained trapped in the dusk of a dictatorship. The contrast was inescapable. While one nation moved forward towards liberation, another remained under the weight of repression. Our president then, Daniel Arap Moi, had been in power for 12 years. News bulletins on the public TV and radio frequencies at the time, belonging to Kenya's national broadcaster, then called the Voice of Kenya, began with his name. The message here was that the only things worth reporting at the top of every newscast had to do with him. Choirs were formed to sing his praises. Choirs. And these songs would play every day. The media belonged to the state, and the state belonged to Moi, whose guiding principle was captured in the phrase, fuata nyayo, or follow the footsteps. The path that Moi trod on, he would repeat, was laid by Jomo Kenyatta, Kenya's first president. So when Kenyans watched the apartheid system begin to collapse with the release of Mandela, it was with hope. Mandela's freedom shone the briefest glimmer of hope onto shards of the promise of freedom that had splintered over time in Kenya and bounced them onto the unending darkness that was our experience. My father was among the more hopeful ones in this regard, because he was among the hundreds of students who came of age a decade past, towards the end of Jomo Kenyatta's rule. He and his contemporaries had marched in protest against the heavy-handedness of Kenya's aging first president, when his government was directly implicated in the murder of a rising political star, J.M. Kariuki. He was expelled from the University of Nairobi for his activism and was part of an underground student movement whose aim it was to nurse the embers of Kenya's dwindling independent spirit. Kenyatta had ensured that all opposition to his rule was either in jail or exiled. When my father and my late mother wed, almost exactly a year before the death of Kenyatta, the stakes immediately became too high for him to keep daring the state as publicly as he once did. Too many of his friends and his contemporaries had disappeared and would disappear into the bowels of Moi's state. In 1986, just 4 years before Mandela's release, stories began to emerge of a government building with torture chambers in its basement. Men and women were being kidnapped off the street and wound up in this nightmare of a place. Some never made it out. This brutality changed Kenya in a way that Kenyan author Yvonne Adhiambo War, who has preceded me on this stage, giving this very same lecture, put very well in her book, Dust. After Mboya, Kenya's official languages, English, Swahili, and silence. There was also memory. Mandela's visit to Kenya in July 1990 was electric. Can you imagine, as a 7-year-old, I wish that I had been there in the throngs at the stadium, not just to witness him, but to experience his presence, the embodiment of every African struggle. Decades later, I learned that during this same visit, Mandela had wanted to visit the grave of Dedan Kimathi, whose picture you'll see up fairly soon, Kenya's most valorized freedom fighter, but was disappointed when our then President Daniel Moi openly refuted this request. It turns out that Kimathi's and the fight of the Land Freedom Army, more commonly known as the Mau Mau, had inspired Mandela. The Mau Mau had long been proscribed by our founding president, Jomo Kenyatta, listed along gangs with truly malevolent goals as being a banned organization. For context, ladies and gentlemen, the Mau Mau were freedom fighters who fought against British oppression in Kenya. What poetic irony then, that Africa's most venerated leader would, via his request, spotlight the blind disregard that Kenya's ruling regime had for the cornerstone upon which the myth-making of Kenya's march to freedom was built. Kenya's leaders were at odds with Mandela, but it was more than that. The state was actively rewriting Kenyan history, erasing the radical independence movements that did not align with the state's sanitized version of freedom. If only because of Mandela's request, history demanded that Dedan Kimathi be remembered by all of us. Because Kimathi was ours, our Moses, our Marcus, our Malcolm. He didn't live to see the future he was fighting for, but he was one of our guiding lights towards it. Mandela's request forced Kenyans to confront an uncomfortable truth. Africa's most celebrated leader was paying tribute to a man that Kenya's own government had tried to forget. Mandela showed Kenya that Kimathi wasn't just our hero, but an African icon, an upright man. Uprightness, especially in places dominated by systems meant to make ordinary people live lives of subservience, is a rare, very rare quality that I invite all of us to consider today. Kimathi and Mandela had very much in common. Both loved poetry and letters. Both led armed struggles. Both were betrayed before capture. Kimathi's defiant words, "I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees," echoed Mandela's declaration at the Rivonia trial. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. How many of us would make such a choice? Mandela and Kimathi's struggles were more than the resistance against colonial rule. They were about preserving the soul of their nations from corruption and corrosion. Now, this is something that I urge all of us to reflect on, the soul. Now, that bravery, learned from these Pan-African mentors and from my father, inspired me in part to become a journalist. What a profession. My journey into journalism began in 2005 at Kenya's Kenya Television Network, KTN, a station that had been at the forefront of documenting our country's transition to multi-party democracy. By 18, I had watched the opposition unite after very many failed attempts, rallying around the chant. I think the Kenyans will remember this. Yote yawezekana bila Moi, which means everything is possible without Moi. Then came the song of my generation, Unbogable. The opening bar of this song is an adaptation of a US rap lyric and was the arresting start to our anthem of defiance. It declared, "What the hell is you looking for? Can't a young Luo make money anymore?" Unbogable, or indomitable, was our message to Moi and his ilk. We wouldn't be threatened anymore. Our time had arrived. When the opposition candidate Mwai Kibaki's victory was confirmed in 2002, I promised myself that I wouldn't just watch his swearing in on TV. I had to be there. Now, this was one of the best days of my life. Now, I say one of because my wife is in the audience. And if it was the best day of my life, you can guarantee I would live here without a wife. I blended in with tens of thousands who came to witness the deliverance of our country from the hands of those who it meant harm. Amid the crowd, I saw mostly young people my age, all with the same joyous countenance. We sang as one, cheered as one, and we swore Mwai Kibaki in as one. That day was more than a political milestone. We had all finished the fight that Dedan Kimathi had started, or so we thought. I was 19 when Mwai Kibaki was sworn in, and 22 when I joined the newsroom. In just 3 years, the progress that I had so fervently celebrated was unraveling. Corruption, fully owned by the new regime, was back in the headlines. The coalition that wrestled power away from Moi was in shambles, and we were headed to a pivotal election. Covering this fraying of Kenya's fabric day to day, it all seemed like political theater, but there was something that gnawed at me. I held out hope, believing that if a dictator who lasted 24 years in power could leave, then surely the election that we were facing wasn't too steep a hill to climb. But then something cynical had poisoned the water. Politics were no longer about the ideals of a hopeful nation, but the identities of political adversaries. The quest to gain or to retain power at any cost overtook everything. Leaders who were once brothers and sisters in arms filled their chests with air and blew hard into their dog whistles. Clouds gathered, and an evil crept back into the land. Banter on the streets cut deep. Even toilet humor was venomous. I'll give you some examples. Songa, serikali inakojoa. Move, the government is taking a piss. That was an often repeated joke that had a darker meaning, much darker. It was a message to supporters of Mwai Kibaki that even their time at urinals and in toilets would come after the incoming government of Raila Odinga had relieved itself. But here's another. Odhamakine yetu, dhamakine siao. That was a Kikuyu alliterative metaphor from that time. And what it means is, leadership belongs to us. Fish belong to them. This was a dig at the Luo community from which Raila Odinga hails. The Luo are a Nilotic tribe who settled around Lake Victoria. They are fisherfolk, yes, but the metaphor was meant to express that they could never rise beyond this. People from opposing tribes eviscerated one another with their words. Soon, they would do so in shocking hand-to-hand violence. These divisionary tactics echo forward in the state of affairs today, in today's politics, at home in Kenya, here in the Netherlands, and around the world. But we'll get to this. In the 2007 election, I was among the journalists at the tallying center reporting as tensions flared. Politicians barked accusations at each other on live TV, fueling the fire they had ignited long before. Then it all fell apart. A paramilitary unit kicked us all out of the tallying center minutes before the dusk swearing in of the former president, the late Mwai Kibaki. As I left, I saw a pillar of smoke just rising from beyond the rim of the hill leading out of Nairobi city center. And for 2 months after that dark December day, we journalists covered some of the worst violence that I or our country had ever seen. We covered the pompous theoretical debates of unrepented leaders one day, and then walked the lands littered with tents made of tarp, filled with displaced men, women, and children. When it dawned on our leaders just how high the stakes were, they drew slightly back from the edge of the abyss. our nationhood flailed in the storm that these leaders had created in large part, but that we, the people, had taken ownership of. The job ahead was to fix the soul of the country that we had all broken. We once again put our faith in who? Our leaders. The two main protagonists of the conflict shook hands and made firm promises to deliver Kenya back onto the path of Dedan Kimathi's dream. In the years after the post-election violence, Kenya very seriously debated the question of justice. Who would bring those suspected of fanning the flames to heel? Kenya turned to the international justice system. We literally turned to you here in the Netherlands at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I spent a month here covering the pre-trial conference hearings of the soon-to-be president, Uhuru Kenyatta, and his soon-to-be deputy, now president, William Ruto. Now this and every other attempt to establish who was responsible for our near descent into the abyss was an errand born in hope, but killed in its crib. The International Criminal Court, as Western institutions often do of African issues, underestimated the depth of the problem they had on their hands. Prosecutors didn't anticipate the lengths to which powerful men would go for these cases to fail. Witnesses mysteriously disappeared or were murdered. The cases all but collapsed. From this, I imagine that at some level, the cynicism that seeped into every Kenyan's bones and their subconscious after this poisoned the idea that the country's soul was worth reclamation. Who, after all, sent mothers and children to their graves? We don't yet have an official answer from ours or any other court, as I mentioned, including the International Criminal Court. Now, we may all have our theories, some more credible than others, but the work of determining who was at the heart of the violence remains unfinished. Mind you, 1,500 people died in that violence. Who would speak for a public in anguish? This question that we asked at that time confronts us today. We are dealing with a system that, on the surface, seems upright and amenable to accountability, but in truth is accountable to no one. This isn't just a Kenyan problem, as I've said. It has an all too familiar ring, and power has everything to do with it. Now, if you'll allow me, let me draw back for a moment from Kenya to illustrate my point. In the wake of the October 7th attacks in Israel, we witnessed, quote unquote, the first genocide in history to be broadcast live. These were in the words of Blinya Negrole, the lawyer representing South Africa at the International Court of Justice. Now, more recently, after experiencing 15 months of the worst assault in their recent history, Palestinians heard US President Donald Trump suggest that other countries should take them in, that their land could be a Riviera in the Middle East, as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu grinned in agreement. Now, I won't spend time asking what reactions might have come had this same situation repeated itself in Luxembourg, in Brussels, or here in Amsterdam. I won't ask. But what I will say is this. Where countries such as ours and Palestine have turned to the global justice system looking for uprightness, we've been failed. Because these same systems that continue to predate on the public in our homes, they're just mirrors of the countries that put them in place. American journalist and writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his new book, The Message, puts it very succinctly. Great canons angle towards great power, and the great privilege of great power is an incuriosity about those who lack it. When it matters, these systems have largely failed to act on behalf of those who need it the most, because the powers that back these systems only respond to power and to those who wield it. which brings me to a debate that connects Kenya and the Netherlands. At the invitation of President William Ruto, the Dutch king and queen are set to make a state visit to Kenya in March of this year. A petition has been raised to ask that they don't. In the weeks before giving this lecture, I've been asked a few times to weigh in on this impending visit and petition. I've given some answers, but I've been reflecting as I've been writing this lecture. I've been reflecting about what those answers were and what I truly felt. So here goes. We were caught between the practicality of maintaining a relationship with a country that has been friendly to us, and what by the royal visit would be an implied endorsement of a leadership that many in Kenya are at odds with. The Dutch royals have no power to make any decisions that could impact Dutch foreign policy in Kenya and as concerns Kenya. That is a province of your political leadership. However, the royals are a symbol of national unity, history, and legacy for the Dutch, and this on its own holds power. So what this visit does could be seen as building President Ruto's profile or Kenya's profile. Now, the two ought to signify the same thing, that the net benefit is to Kenya. But because of what is happening in Kenya, currently these two mean very different things. Now, I've been debating this even as recently as when I was in the green room. And my view is that whether or not they visit Kenya is immaterial. But they shouldn't shy away from addressing the contradictions that they see from what is spoken by our president versus what is said by our people. They can't ignore this. As friendly nations and as equals, both the Netherlands and Kenya should have the space to offer advice or help to the people of each nation. And by that same token, I might add, Kenya should have the license to address something very important that's been happening globally. Kenya should have the license to address the racial undertones of the shift in Dutch politics and European politics directly. If for no other reason, this should be how we conduct our affairs, because at a human level, there is no power distance between a Dutch citizen and a Kenyan, especially when we are weighing the impact of power in our own lives. This is important. It's important because in the past, commentary about the affairs of Africans was done from a very paternalistic, misinformed, and to be honest, plain racist place of perceived superiority. And it happens today as well. Donald Trump and Elon Musk both made incredibly daft comments about the debate in South Africa over a land expropriation law that was passed in January of this year. Trump accused South Africa of human rights abuses, and Elon chimed in, tweeting that the laws were racist. Not one of them ever referred to the centrality of the land issue in South Africa and its connection to the dark legacy of apartheid, whose end we are celebrating today through celebrating the life of Nelson Mandela. Now, if Musk was a wise man, all he needed to do was check the community notes under his post, and he'd have been corrected. But what the authors of the petition in asking the Dutch royals not to visit is not what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing at all. As the Americans would say, the streets are speaking for themselves. It is a call for the people around the world to recognize that there is a failure of leadership in Kenya that shouldn't go unnoticed or unremarked. So if this point of view is acceptable, the Dutch royals are free to comment on Kenyan affairs even if they visit or they don't visit, and that those affairs are the ones that they care about and the public cares about, then let me set the ball rolling again in the direction of your own affairs. I think I'll sip water at this point in time. I think that the people of the Netherlands or to critically examine why the dominant narrative around the violence surrounding the AFC Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv football match was so loud on the so-called savagery of pro-Palestinian supporters, yet far quieter on the race baiting and provocations of the Maccabi fans. In the wake of the violence, the die had been cast, and the immigrant community in the Netherlands, primarily those from Morocco and Palestine, were to blame. However, I recently watched a YouTube video documenting a significant portion of the violence made by a 16-year-old vlogger called Bender. He did what journalists in large part failed to do. He documented the evening and every instance of escalation of the violence in a way that gave a much more nuanced picture of what took place. The facts are now out, but this is still a question that the Dutch must ask themselves. Why did the evil immigrant narrative spread so easily in the wake of the violence? Why, in a nation whose history should teach them to know better, isn't there a more nuanced discussion about migration? Why is it that the Netherlands, one of the most innovative nations on earth, capable of holding back the sea, cannot seem to confront this issue with directness and sincerity? Why indeed? Isn't that what the Polder model symbolizes? The continuing rise of intolerance is telling you something about your nation. That the soul of this nation in which we are seated today requires re-examining, lest it be consumed by the passions of the prejudiced among you. Now, I understand that both as a Kenyan and as an observer of history, why these conversations are difficult, especially when they come from those who do not share your citizenship like me. But after all, what truly are friends for? If diplomacy exists only for diplomacy's sake, then it is the very antithesis of the age in which we live. The Netherlands has led the world in reimagining physical landscapes. It must now find the courage to reshape its moral and political terrain. It must look into itself and rediscover its own soul. Now, this is difficult, but if it needs an example, it can look to Kenya's youth. And here's why. In my view, the most consequential 2 months of Kenya's recent history were June and July of 2024. This is when protests led by Kenya's youth confronted an establishment whose order had stood for an age. The protests began as murmurs, then built and became full-throated screams against unjust taxes. But this time it felt different. It felt edgier. It felt cooler. It felt more relentless. The faces of dissent weren't the usual suspects. They were young, they were fearless, and they were everywhere. I saw a young actress, deep in her Get Ready With Me video, breaking down the finance bill on TikTok. I saw a comedian do the same, only in Kikuyu, his mother tongue. And then I saw tens of other young people follow his lead and disseminate this information in tens of other Kenyan languages. I saw the sharp-tongued responses of the political elite and analysis of TV pundits as well. But this time their admonitions were blunt. I saw a president and his coterie ignore, then mock, then threaten those dissenting voices. Mockery and threats didn't succeed. Their words were turning to ash in their mouths, while the young's every move seemed as if it was injected with pure sunlight. They disinfected the landscape of tired sound bites and hawkish politics. Kenyans held X spaces with hundreds of thousands of people, speaking for 5, 10, 12 hours at a go. They brought uprightness and credibility to a country starved of the same. I wasn't in the country at the time, and I was kicking myself for not being there. But with hindsight, I realized that the distance gave me time to begin thinking about what was and is happening in my country. All the while, the demands of the public grew louder, their intentions more brazen. Days after the first successful protest, a call to action came: Occupy Parliament. June the 25th, 2024 would be the day of this reckoning. I sat glued to TV an hour or two before dawn in San Francisco, but hours behind Nairobi, watching the protest build and build and build, threatening to deliver on the stated objective of the protesters: Occupy Parliament. All roads led to Kenya's parliament. In the pit of my stomach, I felt a tightening as crowds surged forward. Then, on live TV, I heard bursts of gunfire. And when the smoke and the tear gas cleared, I saw bodies on the road. The Rubicon had been crossed on both sides, by both sides. Police had fired on and killed young people right outside the complex of buildings where laws directing how the police should act were made. And then hundreds of young people poured into the precincts of Parliament, stealing the ceremonial mace and essentially impeaching Kenya's legislature. Strangely, despite the illegality that they had all been collectively a part of, it was the actions of the government that I was more fearful of. New, young blood had just been shed at the steps of a corrupted citadel. Much more would be shed in this new chapter. Now, the bloodletting isn't as public today, but it continues, as does the creation of a climate of fear and the push by Kenya's political elite to break apart this monolith of a public that seems unified around wanting better for their country. Politicians are desperately trying to find the right political allies with the right set of potential voters behind them to win in the coming election in 2027. They seem bent on pushing Kenyans back into the tribal debates that our politicians know only too well how to trigger. Now, given what I've seen, and given what Kenya went through in 2007, this is a scary prospect. Still I sense the presence of something far more irrepressible than fear. Kenya's youth are fighting for more than fairer tax laws. They are fighting for a just country. Not the version of Kenya whose colonial leaders killed Dedan Kimathi. Not the country where corruption and tribalism have been used to co-opt or kill off. They are fighting for a version of Kenya that uplifts everyone and everything. Our youth are fighting for Kenya's soul. Now, I know it might seem strange as a journalist whose world is built on evidence to speak of the soul, especially when so much can be measured. We can measure health metrics, economic statistics. We can even measure the angry takes of thousands of people on X. Not all of those things paint a hopeful picture. In fact, none of them do. But in the dark of the 25th of June, watching a generation rise against brute force, I felt something deeper. I felt a soul in turmoil. Was it the pain of protesters who had battered and shot? I didn't bleed, but I felt it. Or was it the anguish of parents mourning their children? Children who were killed in the streets. My wife and I have kids. I can imagine the unbearable grief of losing someone like that. But over 60 families don't have to imagine. Their loved ones are now gone. Others remain missing. Today. This pain binds us. It's like the torment of a fighter, bruised but refusing to fall. The will to stand, the will to push forward despite all of those blows, that, I believe, comes from the soul. as I mentioned, Kenya is in a battle for the soul of the country. Now I'm using the present tense here very deliberately because, as I've mentioned, this fight is still ongoing. So let's consider for a moment, what is a soul? Now I define a soul as the seat of one's God-given identity. It's a purity, a distillation of a person's truest ideals and values. It's God's breath of life given to every human, but buried deep within our human condition, so that sometimes we tend to forget that it exists. Now, does a country have a soul? I would say again, yes. I think that a country's soul is the unspoken bond between the souls of all people who claim common citizenship, culture, history, and heritage. Notice here I didn't mention race. Common what? All right. As I was making that point, I lost myself in the page somewhere, so I'm trying to recover where I am. I mentioned that a country's soul is the unspoken bond between the souls of all people who claim common citizenship, culture, history, and heritage. Now this brings me to the concerns of today. Can a soul of a country be corrupted? Now if I'm to believe in this concept of a soul as a Christian would, which of course I am, then yes, it can. But by that same token, it also means that a soul can be reclaimed. Now this is what is precisely happening in my country and on my continent. The reclamation, or at least the fight to reclaim the soul. Kenya's protests and the public's unrest are about more than bad governance. They're about reclaiming they're about reclaiming a nation that was stolen by corruption. Corruption planted by colonial rule, watered by our leaders, and defended by power. Brave souls fought to uproot it. They were murdered, they were brutalized, they were denied opportunity and shamed into silence. Some were bought, but many were lost. Not everything was all bleak. Independence did bring progress, but for those in power, corruption was too seductive to resist. Again and again, private gain outweighed public good. Yet in every generation, Kenyans have risen to fight back. They won victories, pushed forward, believing in dignity, not wealth, and believing that dignity was the true measure of freedom. But the lie persisted, that dignity only belonged to the rich and the powerful. This is why when Mandela asked about Kimathi's tomb, there was no answer. Kimathi, like Mandela, symbolized the opposite, freedom for the many. His erasure served the few. So it's incredible to witness what's happening today in my country, as well as in West Africa, a region that needed to rediscover its pride long enough to tell France to leave it be. I'd use different words, but I think there are children in the audience. Now, yes, it's more complex than that. And yes, there are many things about what is happening in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and in Guinea that ought to be interrogated further. Frexit, as it's being called, resonates so deeply with so many on the continent because those are the difficult steps to the Africa of Mandela's dreams. Self-reliance, leadership of Africans by Africans that so far isn't predatory in its mean, and above all, the comfort of living in one's own skin that only true freedom and dignity can give you. Uprightness, in a word. How poetic that this is literally happening in Burkina Faso, the land of upright men and women, an honoring of the purity of the African soul, and the people fighting for it, just as Mandela honored Dada and Kimathi. It has been a long time in coming, centuries in fact. Now these are the ideals that Mandela spoke of during the Rivonia trial. ideals that he hoped to achieve but was prepared to die for. Finally, it seems like the right battle is being fought for the revolution of the African mind and the cleansing of its soul. We are far from where we should be, but we're not where we used to be. Make no mistake, Ibrahim Traore's example in Burkina Faso is one that many an African wishes their leader would emulate. It has made us all braver, but the seeds of that bravery were planted in many ways by men like Mandela and Kimathi. These are ideals that I dare say we should all be willing to die for. My instinct as a journalist at this point is to point out that there are no angels and revolutions can and have been stolen. We cannot go into this new age with our eyes wide shut, even with men like Traore. But I know that you know this, and at this point I'm speaking to the Africans in the audience and those who will watch this later. I know that you know that we must be more vigilant now than we have ever been. This moment in Kenya and Africa does not exist in isolation, though. Across the world, there is a growing awareness of the weight of history, the consequences of past and present injustices, and the need to reclaim dignity. We see it in the uprisings against police brutality in the United States, as well as in the youth-led protests against authoritarianism in Bangladesh. What happened in Kenya in June in 2024, as I have mentioned, was not just about tax hikes. It was about reclaiming our own future. Kenya's struggle is part of a larger global reckoning with systems that have outlived their legitimacy and ought to be re-examined or discarded. Now, Africa's youth have shattered the illusion that we are destined to serve under systems that were never built to serve us. They refuse to inherit broken institutions or accept dishonorable leadership. It is time for all of us to confront how power has shaped and misshaped our societies. In July 1990, Nelson Mandela didn't come to Kenya just to mourn Dedan Kimathi. He came to honor him, to remind us that the fight for dignity never ends. Their deaths left wounds, but their spirits live on in this very moment, urging us to confront the worst of our nations and choose differently. Now, this isn't just in Africa. As I've mentioned, this is the same debate that should be happening here in the Netherlands. Will we all seize this moment, or will we let it slip away? What will you do in the moment that you're living through? A good friend of mine once told me that he seeks people who are not invested in Kenya's failure, and I agree. But what is happening now could be painted as a failure by our politicians, from the people who stand the most to lose. But what is happening is not a breakdown, make no mistake. It is an investment in Kenya's success, led by its true owners, its people. Our constitution demands nothing less. It begins with these words: "We, the people of Kenya, acknowledging the supremacy of the Almighty God of all creation, honoring those who heroically struggle to bring freedom and justice to our land, proud of our ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity, and determined to live in peace and unity as one indivisible sovereign nation, respectful of the environment, which is our heritage, and determined to sustain it for the benefit of future generations, committed to the nurturing and protecting of the well-being of the individual, the families, communities, and the nation, recognizing that the aspirations of all Kenyans for a government based on the essential values of human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, social justice, and the rule of law, in a word, uprightness, exercising our sovereign and inalienable right to determine the form of governance in our country, and having participated fully in the making of this constitution, amend and adopt this constitution. What is happening in Kenya, ladies and gentlemen, as I've mentioned, is a fight for the future of this country, the fight for the future of my country. In 2 years, my son, who was 6 years old when I started my organization, will be lining up with me to vote for the country of his dreams. We must all consider now what our youth in our own countries will inherit. This is really a moment of true reckoning, because yes, it might represent itself in the struggles that seem to inhabit the Netherlands. But as I've mentioned, these are truly global struggles. Now, the people of Kenya, specifically the youth, have chosen to claim this moment and fight for the future. But this time it's different. They are now determined to fight. But more importantly, they now have a taste of what it feels like to win. Thank you very much.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Real battle cry there for something bigger than Kenya for all of us. It's all of us. We need to be courageous, embrace discomfort, and speak up and be as outspoken as the people who've been on this stage and as John was there. So fantastic. And that is not all that you'll hear of John. In about 30 minutes' time, the rock star Jennifer Tosh is going... there she is. Is going to be interviewing. You'd think that she was the one being interviewed then. Is going to be interviewing John in the Koninklijke foyer afterwards. So if you would like to listen to that interview and ask your own questions, there'll be space to do that in around 30 minutes' time. Before you go, we've had the hoofdgerecht, the main course, which was all of our fantastic performers. We had our fantastic starter from the mayor of Amsterdam, Femke, and I was the pathetic little amuse at the beginning. Now it's time for the toetje, for the dessert. Please give another round of applause to Fra Fra Sound and Mthunzi Mvubu. There you are. Is my mic on? Is my mic on? Yes? Fra Fra Sounds, everybody. And give it up, please, one more time for our fantastic other performers here tonight. We have Djuwa Mroivili, Ashley Stapelfeldt, and John-Allan Namu. Yes, student selfie. Well done. Fantastic. Oh, it's not stopping. Lovely. Okay, everyone, and listen, on a serious note, remember, if you are feeling down, if you are struggling with the uncertain future that we all have, and you're looking for kind of temporary escape, a series about a recovering mafia boss on Netflix might be the answer. I believe the mayor is still here, yes! Thank you very much to the mayor for being here. Thank you to all of you for being here. It's been a fantastic evening now, early evening. Please stick around, join us for some drinks and food, and head to the Koninklijke Foyer for the conversation with John and Jennifer. And yeah, let's give it up for Fra Fra Sounds one more time. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, that is it. My name's Ikenna Azuike. It's been a privilege. So goodbye and till the next time. Well done, well done.